Alrighty, I think we're live, question mark. Let's do this. Seems like it's working okay. Chat. Anyway. So, can I turn myself up at all? Let's see here. Oop. Test. Like it's working okay. Chat. Anyway. So, can I turn myself up at all? Let's see here. Oop. There we go. Test. Like it's working okay. Chat. Anyway. So, can I turn myself up at all? Alrighty, I'm satisfied. I think. Let's go here. So I figured something I'm always trying to do is reevaluate my ability to intelligently read like a paper and accurately understand its conclusion and then articulate it to people, because it's something that it's so easy to not do correctly, if that makes sense. So I don't know, there's a site called Think Statistically. The guy seems open-minded. It's a 2020 article, but I figured it'd be fun to read, just to see what we could gain from it. Anyway, now the title is there evidence of systemic racism in the U.S.? I figured this would be a good one because it's everybody likes to scream at each other. Typically, my understanding of it is the right wing tends to be more focused on things like, oh, racism is a really strong claim. You should really have some evidence before calling people that. And it's like, and they basically just kind of look for like, oh, well, is there a possibility where someone could do something that could potentially be racist and have it not be racist? So I suppose an example would be like, could you vote against affirmative action and say that you're like not racist, if that makes sense? And I think if that was the only thing you were voting for and like everything else was fine, I think you could probably say like, sure, maybe it's just something he's not informed on. But I think it's gonna get into the definition of racism, but I think racism, it's a lot of it, what I care about, like if you just think something like, okay, I think you're stupid, and you might vote for stupid people, but unless you're actually like your actions are really what I'm concerned about. The reason why racism is a problem is because a lot of times it informs actions, whether that be literally going out and burning crosses on people's lawns, or simply protesting at funerals, or maybe you're just like, you have a little blog on, or a channel on Rumble or something where you just talk about black people in negative lights. I typically like to focus on black people just because it's a really common example, and I think most people are usually engaged with it. But if I look up definition of racism, and he might go into it here. I haven't really read it. I kind of skimmed it a little bit, but yeah. Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. So, prejudice. Let's go with this first one here. Prejudice definition. Preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. So maybe I'm uneducated about, let's say, and for the sake of argument, this is a hypothetical. I'm not saying it is or isn't correct, but let's say that affirmative action is legitimately needed, and it will legitimately help black people and other minority groups. When you say that's dumb or that doesn't work, then, and it would actually work, then you would technically have prejudice against that group of people, right? Like, that makes sense. Now you might justify it by saying like, oh, well, we don't want it to, like, take away jobs from white people. But when that's like a tiny minority of the cases, then you're not really basing this on a legitimate concern. Like, there might be things that need to get tweaked and whatnot, but when for the most part it works better and for the most part it helps most people, then I think that's fine. And if you're so like, oh, well, I still care about that small group of people, well, then why do you care about that small group of whites but not a bigger group of blacks? Like that, it's a tree. And just be clear, prejudice, discrimination, or it doesn't have to be all three of these. It can just be one. When I was little, I kind of got this definition of racism as a very colloquial thing. And I kind of just had this feeling like, oh, you have to legitimately just hate someone for being black or having black skin. But it's not that simple. I think those people who just hate and are like consciously recognizing that they hate this group of people, those people are very, very rare. And that at that point, anybody who simply verbally acknowledged that there was another reason for their view does not mean that you're not racist. So racism is by definition an ignorant it's an ignorant philosophy. Like, if you it's not based on good things. A common example is the 1350 deal, where people will be like, oh, like, blacks commit 50% of the crimes in spite of being 30% of the population. And so if I were to say, oh, well, that's systemic issues, and then you're like, oh, the 1350, like, that's a common thing that neo-Nazis and racist people say. So, but I think it's just better that I define it, because I feel like there's these preconceived notions that we all start with, and we just kind of go from there. And I'll read this one just so I'm not being uncharitable, but belief that different races possess distinct characteristic, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. Yeah, I think I'll be operating off this one, just because it is the main one. And if you disagree with this, then, I don't know, scream at that. But I think for most of the world's history, people have been biased towards different groups, and that's fine. I mean, I don't know if you're a young earth creationist or whatever, or if you believe in evolution, whatever the take is. If you look at modern human history, everybody naturally has an aversion or an appreciation for their own group. So if you grow up in a town full of Hispanic people and you never ever are exposed to anything outside of that town, but then one day maybe a black person shows up, you'll be like, what on earth? Because you've just never seen it, so it's immediately averse to your biology. Like, your biology doesn't like change. It likes to have things under control, likes to feel autonomous, likes to feel safe. It's a survival mechanism. And I don't think this is controversial, even if you are like a 6,000 year creationist or whatever. So, with that said, we have defense mechanisms. If I run towards you really quickly with an angry look on my face, like, you're gonna back up, you're gonna get in defense mode. When you go into an unfamiliar situation, maybe it's at school, or maybe you're an introvert and you've had a quiet life, and then you go to like a frat party for the first time. Like, it's gonna be averse. Like, you're gonna have an aversion to it. And that's why people are like, oh, I don't like this situation, don't like that situation, because ultimately they don't feel in control or safe in that environment. This is just intrinsically with every human. And while I think we have to be careful when we say that, like, people are racist, because people, they have this feeling and then they instantly rear up and they're like, oh, the left's just being stupid again. But technically, this is as definitionally accurate as you can get. And people have realized this for quite a while now. When I say a while, I don't mean like millions of years or anything, but I mean, like, 20th century. So, yeah, and I think we were figuring it out in like the 1800s as well. But we've done a lot of scholarship on it. We tried to assess what it really is, what's the ideology behind it. This is pretty much it. So we looked up prejudice. So just to recap, prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, by one of these three parties against a person on the basis of their racial group, effectively, or ethnic group, I guess. So by that definition, you would be racist against Jewish people. Because I think I saw a debate one time, and there was like a guy trying to argue that like race realism was okay, and he was trying to distinguish between race and ethnicity. But I do think that technically qualifies. So, I think, because like if you hate Jewish people, like I'm sorry, you're still racist. Anyway, and it's typically like that's the thing. It can be done. Like you could be a black person and you can 100% be racist against a white person. You 100% can. The problem is those people don't exist nearly in the parties of the other way. It's and it makes sense because they're a majority group. They're going to have more people, so you could argue statistically that's a likelihood, but it doesn't always have to be. Like there's not like a completely contradictory scenario where that's not the case. But anyway, so let's explore this further. So prejudice, racism is one of these three factors, compiled with one of these three factors, used against a person or group of people based on their membership to a racial or ethnic group. Now, what does prejudice mean? So, a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or fact. Okay, so let's say that, let's take, here's a good example here. Steven Crowder, I guess, would be a good one. Now, he will cite statistics all day as to why. Let's try to find Steven Crowder on systemic racism. See if I can find something from him real quick. Now, he wouldn't deny...
Do you believe that at this point you are feeling the ripple effects from slavery in the history of the United States and that you face systemic discrimination?
I think there have definitely been times in my life and places that I've been where I have felt the effect.
I don't believe the United States is a racist country. If you disagree, you're more than welcome to change my mind.
So let's say that he had this view, and I'm not saying he's being irrational here at all. Because he's actually seems very level-headed here. But this is his view. Now let's say that was wrong, right? And all of his other views were wrong regarding systemic racism. Those accrue quite quickly, and now you have a bunch of specific prejudices and biases towards this group of people that you don't really know about because you think that you're justifying it rationally. He's a smart guy, he's not a fucking idiot. But that's still a prejudice, is what I'm trying to... I kind of messed up here. Sorry. I can't fucking spell. Prejudice. Holy shit. There we go. Yeah, but it's not based on any reason or actual experience. Like, you might have an experience. But that doesn't mean that, like, all these people are problematic, or that they're regularly problematic, or, things like that. They just say harm or injury that results or may result from some action or judgment. So, let's say you publicly advocate that America is not a racist country. And we are a racist country. Let's say hypothetically we are. I'm not saying we are, but hypothetically. Then you are basically telling people that a system exists that hurts people And it does that from some action, and technically it stems from some action or judgment. Like, if it doesn't come from there, like, where else does it come from? So that's just an example. So, you know, it's unfortunate, really. Another definition here, they say give rise to prejudice and someone may bias. It's not super helpful, that's more the verb, but I don't think that any of the examples or hypotheticals that I'm giving here are super problematic. But merely just because you consciously have a justification that's other than race for your justification of not being racist does not mean that you're not racist. Now, this, I think, to get a little bit more complicated here, and I'm going to open my Google Doc for this, that way I can spell this out for everybody. Where's my, let's see here. I just want to make all this, like, black, if I can. Not because of the subject matter of this discussion, but because I want to see it better. So, we've established racism, and to give it a better definition, we've looked at the word prejudice. And we're still exploring this one, because the other ones, I don't think most people disagree with this word or this word. Although those things still could happen, so I think we will dive into them. But still, for now, we're stuck on prejudice. What is prejudice? So let's go to
Do you believe that at this point you are feeling the ripple effects from slavery in the history of the United States and that you face systemic discrimination?
I think there have definitely been times in my life.
Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Before I do that, I want to outline a potential argument here. Let's see now. So, okay, here's what I wanted to say. So, when racism is what I just said was a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience, means that you have an opinion of something, and if that opinion is wrong, then you're prejudiced against it. Because likely, and this isn't always true, but likely you have just not done the research necessary to understand the situation, which doesn't make you stupid, doesn't make you a terrible human being. It just kind of makes you like the average American or person, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, and, you know, I think I'll leave that for another topic. But, so let's say that you make a claim let's say you make a claim like black kids are, we'll use one from this article here. So black K-12 students are almost 4 times more likely than white students to get 1 or more out-of-school suspensions. Black girls in particular face discrimination. They're 5.5 times more likely to be suspended compared to white girls, while Native Americans are 3.3 times more likely to face suspension. So naturally, black girls have... Now, okay, before I say this, there's a whole host of reasons why this could happen. And I think that the burden would be on someone like the left to say, okay, this is racism and not some other factor. But we'll get to that soon enough. For now, if you were to say that, no, like if I were to say that, oh, well, how do you explain black students being 4 times more likely than white students to get out of school suspensions. And the person I'm talking to comes back and he says, oh, well, I am not, like, that's not true. That's not true. It doesn't happen more. Now, this person might be ignorant. He might not even have a source. But he's saying it's false without properly looking into it. Now, frankly, from the brief conversation we've had, I have no idea what he's talking about. I have no idea what he thinks. And I'll be like, well, sure, man, I can find you a source. I can find you a good source for this. And he's like, no, man, it just doesn't happen. Like, and I'll be like, okay, well, what's that based on? He's like, it's just based on, like, and then he says something like, well, he doesn't tell me what it's based on, but he says, listen, when I went to school, there were way more white kids that got suspended than black kids. All right? And then I'll be like, okay, that's fine, but that doesn't exactly represent the big picture across the U.S., does it? Like, if you have an entire population and you have one experience, how do you know that that accurately represents the situation across the whole thing? So this is a common fallacy that I see people make when they're talking about this thing. And I don't always do a great job articulating it, unfortunately. But, yeah, like, if you run into a situation where you say you use an anecdotal experience as a retort to a statistic when you're talking about a big population, that doesn't say anything about federal policy, really, or very rarely does. It says very little about it, because the point is you're trying to be as accurate as possible. So that's an example of how you can have a logical justification for something, but you could still be racist, if that makes sense, because you are still prejudiced, I should say, which would mean that you are an individual using prejudice against a particular person on the group of their racial or ethnic group. And the way you would enact that would be by voting for laws that don't seek, like, you might vote against a politician that has no plan to help students, but then you might have another politician that does have policies that they want to implement that are data-driven and will actually help these kids, help mitigate these offenses for these kids, if that makes sense. I don't think that is super controversial. At least it really shouldn't be. I mean, it's pretty simple. But I guess we'll keep going. So, prejudice is merely what this says. It is having the opinion. Like, I even went the extra mile and talked about, like, I went more into this one right here, where I talked about the actual action with the voting. But even just having the opinion, and it's not based on actual reason or actual experiences, is not honest. So there's a lot of history on, I think it went back to the 60s and 70s is where, like, the foundations of things like critical race theory, which started talking about the systemic issues that were still derived. But, I mean, even, like, if you go back to, like, Jim Crow laws, which were clearly racist, like, that's systemic in and of its definition. Like, they had separate schools, segregated schools. Like, that's by definition, racist. I think your typical Republican would agree with that. I don't think, like, a lot of, I mean, maybe neo-Nazis wouldn't, but, I mean, they want their own little ethno-states and everything. So anyway, I'm not really talking to them, but I'm trying to go more with, yeah. Now, the retorts, I guess maybe we should, before we jump into the rest of it, let's go to, what is discrimination? And this is just, like, I'm not even doing anything fancy here. So, discrimination is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people, especially on the grounds of ethnicity, age, sex, or disability. So, the unjust or prejudicial treatment. So there's that word prejudice again. We know what that word means because we just looked it up. Unjust, this one's a bit more, I think, psychologically nuanced. I think most people don't care. Not based on or behaving according to what is morally right and fair, which, we would typically use something generally like the golden rule or, some sort of moral compass to justify, but that's kind of a philosophical term. But still, with that said, you are still using prejudicial treatment, perhaps in your voting patterns. Now, and that's the thing, there's varying degrees to this. Like, I will fully admit that there's things that I've done in the past that are prejudiced and discriminatory. I'm not a great example. There's things that I've done that are definitely sexist as well. And it's, I'm not out there, like, doing horrible things like, raping women and killing black people. Like, I'm not doing that. But, it's subtle stuff. And I think trying to demonize another group is probably not the most beneficial thing, but it's really hard to explain this to them when they don't really understand what it means, and they haven't really taken the time to follow the train of logic, if that makes sense. And that's okay. But if you're having a conversation and someone gets mad at you, it's very hard to react in a calm, intelligent manner. And instead, you just kind of start realizing that, this conversation is going nowhere, so I'm just going to, start flinging insults at you at rapid paces. So anyway, so this is very simple. I don't think this is very hard at all. And this is just, I've done literally the bare minimum of research. Google the definitions. And antagonism, I'll just do this one. I don't think we need to go into it too much. Prejudice is the one I'm mainly interested in because that's the ones that people use to... Yeah, this is active hostility or opposition. So if you're I want black people to die or something like that, or I want to annihilate certain, Black Lives Matter or something like that, that's just the more extreme version. So anyway, any problems at all? I don't see it. I guess if I don't see somebody who's able to synopsize these arguments, I'm vehemently unimpressed with your ability to characterize me. Because largely you're just repeating propaganda, and it's things that I've heard Steven Crowder say 1,000 times over because I used to be a fan of his. Oh shit. Yeah, I don't think it's lagging too bad. Let me try to remove you. And I don't think I need you, actually. I might open you back up later, but... Okay. There we go. Okay. So I think a good example is... and I'm trying to do this in a super sequential way and not a super long way because it'll just be harder for people to comprehend. But let's watch a little bit of this
places
video.
that I've been where I have felt the effect.
I don't believe the United States is a racist country. If you disagree, you're more than welcome to change my mind.
So it was interesting to me at the beginning. You said you don't think it's a racist country today. Do you think that at some point it was a racist country?
Yes.
Again,
so that's why I'm not saying that the United States was never a racist country.
Yeah.
I think slavery was a horrible evil, of course, and I think it was horrible that it took us to get to the 60s for the Civil Rights Act. I'm not at all here to argue that the United States was never a racist nation. Every single nation since the dawn of civilization has practiced slavery in one form or another. It's still practiced across the globe. Thank God we abolished it.
Yeah, so just my question up front for you is, at what point did we stop being racist? Was when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, or when?
Yeah, I would say after the Civil Rights Act.
So the day of?
The day that everyone was given... No, I mean, systemically, yeah. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't individual racists.
Yeah.
And particularly when I'm talking about 2020, because most of the people out there protesting are not the people who were around during the Civil Rights era. You have a lot of young Americans who have never suffered at the hands of systemic oppression.
Okay.
So he's making the claim that systemic racism is gone. I don't think I'm strawmanning that there. I can watch it again if you want me to. But he literally said no. Now, he might mean prima facie. So I'll account for that when I'm talking about this. So what is systemic racism? hope it just gives me a fucking definition. There we go. Perfect. Discrimination, which we defined up here, Discrimination or unequal treatment on the basis of membership in a particular ethnic group, arising from systems, structures, or expectations that have become established within society or an institution. So let's take the most extreme example, Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws are racist. They did a lot of shitty things, like fucking segregating schools. That enforced racial segregation. So now, that's an extreme version of it. But all this has to be is discrimination, which unjust or prejudicial treatment. So remember that word prejudice. Harm or injury that results from some action or judgment or a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. So, and let's go back to this one. A lot of times these opinions, if they're held by a large group of people, which is, I think, fair to say it's pretty easy to do, then I think that a lot of times will contribute to the institutions. For example, if you have like 50 employees in a business, and they all have some degree of preconceived bias that is not based on reason or actual experience, then you're going to run into an issue where harm or injury may result from the judgments and thus the actions of that business. And this is like the most lenient, like probably least harmful version of racism I can maybe come up with. Maybe not the most, but close, generally speaking. Systems, structures, or expectations that have become established within society or an institution. So an example is 1,000 protesters marched through the city calling for justice. And okay, that doesn't really fucking help me, but so I think that's technically true. To say that, that's systemic racism. It's not super hard. I might change this to there we go, and let's put that up there. Cool. I don't think that's an unfair characterization of what systemic racism should be. So maybe you want me to give like more specific examples. That way I'm removing the generalities. So let's look up real life example. And I did one with the school of systemic racism. But I'll do another one. I think this is the one I may have looked at, maybe, question mark, we'll see. It was okay. So, employment and wealth. This one was education. Now we have employment and wealth. And these are just all simple Google searches. Like, I did not kill myself trying to find some of this. But I don't see anybody really being able to steal my this. And Stephen Crowder will go back to him. Systemic racism's effect on employment is well documented. It begins with the hiring process. Americans with white-sounding names receive 50% more callbacks for their job applications. Having a college degree doesn't necessarily help one's chances. Between 2010 and 2012, one study showed that while only 6% of all engineering students were unemployed, 10% of black college graduates with engineering degrees didn't have jobs. Now, despite these numbers, is getting a degree still worth it? Studies show that while white college-educated households enjoy higher lifetime earnings and better economic achievements, this doesn't apply to black college-educated households. While college graduates are much more likely to get and give financial support for education and or home ownership from their parents, while black college students are more likely to be ones supporting their parents. So there's a lot said there. But what's nice is they have links here, so I actually want to see what this does. So this takes me National Bureau of Economic Research. That's a good source. But I guess it compiles all this shit. Oh, they talk about studies here. That's kind of cool. Anyway, so Black Americans with white sounding names receive 50% more callbacks for their job application. So that's a prejudice, for example. So maybe there's a black person and their name is Thomas, and they fill out an application, and they go for, you have a guy, he's looking over hundreds of applications. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He's just trying to say, there's people who I need to get back. And if you account for similar metrics, like for example, if you have a local university, and they typically have metrics for meeting certain requirements and hitting those things, generally, and they all apply to similar positions, you run into a situation where that employer is going to be like, okay, like we're going through all these people, there's thousands of them maybe. I'm used to a name like Thomas or John or something, as opposed to a name like Jamal or Tyrone or something like that. And it's just totally like, like an image might briefly rise up in their brain for a split second. And that is technically a prejudice. Now, there could be a lot of reasons why maybe the Black Americans with white-sounding names receive 50% more callbacks than the other ones, than the other black people. But, I mean, like what? I mean, you could postulate and speculate, like, maybe the ones with black-sounding names, maybe they just weren't able to receive as many accolades in terms of their educational graduation. Maybe the ones with whiter-sounding names had just higher GPAs overall, and maybe they did more on the side, like more internships, better internships. But then the question kind of arises, like, what causes those things to happen? And a lot of it is, it could be a plethora of things. It could have been their family that they grew up with, their situation, but still there's a reason why that happens. And usually it can go back to two things. It's either a whatever it is, it goes back to either an environmental factor or their biology. And it's always both to some degree. Like maybe they have ADHD or something, so they have a harder time focusing. Maybe it's a more severe level of ADHD. But to say that, well, why didn't they get their ADHD taken care of, maybe? Oh, well, maybe they didn't have good parental support or something like that. There's a ton of reasons. Now, let's try to make this more favorable to a racial or a more conservative position. Maybe it's a situation where this person, they were financially better off. Tyrone was better financially off than Thomas. Thomas still came back, still succeeded, and Thomas might have just been lazy or something. Although, okay, like why was he just lazy though? You could say, oh, well, it's his brain. But is it his brain? Because there's a lot of people who, like you're saying, he's just a normal guy, right? And they'll be like, yeah, he's just a normal guy, but he was just lazy. Okay, so what makes someone be lazy? You just kind of keep going back. And they might be like, oh, he was just, that's how he was. Okay, so do you think that this happens a lot, first off? And then maybe they'll be like, oh, I don't know, but I'm just saying there can be a lot of reasons. You're the one who has to prove it. Okay, sure thing, but typically if someone has that level of laziness, there's a reason behind it. And I don't think that reason is that black people have a higher proclivity to be more lazy. And I just don't see any support for that at all. But we do see support for things like statistically controlled groups where there's 50% more callbacks for white-sounding names. Well, there could be other answers to it. When we see it on this level and we control for various alternatives, then we get closer to the solution that it's more of a systemically racial thing than not. And then the more times you do those studies, it still adds support for it. So if you have a paper and you cite one source, it's not going to be as good as the paper that has 10 sources. It's not going to be as more convincing, if that makes sense. And this was just me trying to be like charitable to that position. But ultimately, this study right here is not evidence that there could be other things. Doubting the statistical significance of this is not necessarily a valid conclusion to come to, because there could be other reasons. What that basically just means is you haven't done the research and you're choosing to not believe it instead, when there's a ton of experts who are saying that it does mean that. Now, if you want to dispute with those experts like you're claiming you do, and you want to have an ultra high standard for them, that's fine. But you actually have to do it. And the person who's probably done it more than most of his audience is Steven Crowder, hence why he's in that position. But there's a reason why he's not writing peer-reviewed papers. Like, there's a reason for that. A, he probably doesn't pay as well. But B, it's not going to work. Typically, you're interested in making claims and trying to follow through on hypotheses. That way we have more information on the world as opposed to less. When you just say it could be for all these different things, which some are impossible to account for, but typically those things are like not evidentially supported. And sometimes we need to do more research, but this is one that's very well documented. I think to keep going on here, we won't spend too much more time, but 6% of all graduates, only 6% of all, between 2010 and 2012, one study showed that while only 6% of all engineering graduates were unemployed, I see. I misread that the first time. 10% of black college graduates with engineering degrees didn't have jobs. So 6% of all of them were unemployed, and 10% of that was black college graduates. Now, I think I can give people on the left here a break who haven't done the research, because they are relying on the experts to have their conclusions. And that's not an appeal to authority. Appeal to authority is when you appeal to somebody who doesn't have a field related to the topic. So if you were to say, I'm appealing to Will Smith to say that systemic racism exists, that's not a good appeal. Likewise, Steven Crowder is a political commentator whose goal is to get people riled up so that they vote for his preferred candidates and they buy his mugs and all that good stuff. Technically, this is true with a lot of things. What news and whatnot, what they do primarily is they try to compile data for your consumption and give you a narrative, which, most people want anyway. But when you kind of get into the deeper root of a lot of these industries, they're all psychology based. Like the ones that figure out human psychology better are the ones that succeed. So yeah, I hope this makes some sense. But when you have a study that shows that white sounding names get better, like if all these statistics are true, which they are, then you have more evidence that racism exists than one showing that it doesn't, if that makes sense. So like a counterexample might be the NBA. Oh, well, the NBA has more black people in it. Like, how come that's not racist against white people? And there might actually be racism against white people in that. But if we look across the board, and especially in more common ones, like there's way more people in the education system than there is in the NBA. There's way more people in engineering jobs than there are in the NBA. There's way more people who own homes than people in the NBA. There's way more, you're citing one thing, and citing one thing is never going to contradict the statistical consensus, unfortunately. Like, that's not, it just never will. So what you have to do is you have to conduct a study, control for groups, and then find a situation where systemic racism would not be prevalent or would not be statistically significant. And then you have to do a bunch of those. The difference between right-wingers and left-wingers here is that the left and the academic system have been doing this regularly. And they've been studying this with hypotheses and conclusions and tests to figure out whether this is happening. And the more that these happen and the more that they follow through, the more that those potential areas where we can't really control for start to diminish. And then at that point, you're really just speculating. Like the only alternative that people who deny the academic consensus have is speculation. And that goes back to this definition of prejudice, which means that you have one that is not based on reason or actual experience. Now, they say actual experience, but you could have one that's, but remember the reason is the big one. So you could have one that's based on actual experience, like, hey, maybe your whole family got killed by black people or something, by some black people. But that's still against reason because not all black people are like that, if that makes any sense. So, I don't know, I think I'm being pretty fucking charitable to the right here. But I find it vehemently unimpressive when nobody can provide a study or a series of study, or even like a meta-analysis would be huge. That would be a more interesting discussion than citing, the NBA or other groups. Like it's really boring. Anyway, I don't know if I want to watch this whole thing.
Science specifically, you're talking about systemic oppression?
Yes.
Okay.
Not racist individuals. There are plenty of racist individuals, and you can find those black, white.
Yeah.
We just had a gentleman right there accost my friend there who's biracial, tell him that he was white. And he said, well, that sounds kind of racist.
Right.
And then the guy got really mad. And then I said, well, I don't know, are you brown or yellow? And he got mad at me. I said, well, I'm just using your same shading rules. And he said something about checking a white box, and I create all the tests. So I don't necessarily know what was going on there. But I'm not arguing that there are not individual racists. But as a country, the United States, not only do I believe that it's the best country in the world for people of any races.
I agree that
there is no
overall we are
system.
the best country in the world. I
Good
agree
for
with
you.
that. Yeah. But I think the main...
Depends what you mean by best. Economically, probably. I think there's a lot of areas that we're lacking in, though, that other countries have advantages in, specifically like education and things like that. But anyway.
place where I disagreed. Perhaps not, we don't have systemic racism, but I think that whenever you think about racism, you have to keep in mind classism. I think that systemically there are a lot of systems that do divide classes and keep lower classes suppressed. And because of our history, because of the way that black people and many brown people were treated in the past, we are tied into lower classes. And you have to keep in mind that when you're talking about racism, oftentimes people actually mean classism, and the two are very closely intertwined. When you look at the numbers, it's how it is.
Well, let me ask you kind of to define classism and how you think that there's systemic oppression through the form.
So this kid is very smart, by the way. That was a great answer. But the question is, what causes classism? And we know that racism is caused by prejudice, which is subconscious or conscious bias. Now, if you think that, like, if you look down on poor people, and this is what a lot of capitalists do, like, they'll look at poor people and they'll be like, yeah, I'm just better than you. Like, when that's not really true. Like, there's a ton of environmental factors that contribute to you succeeding, but that's, it's another topic. Prejudice are against or in favor of people belonging to a particular social class. So, yeah, they are told to be on watch against evil classism. Okay. This kid is very, very sharp. Let's keep listening.
Form of classism, and maybe we'll probably find some common ground and then some areas where we disagree.
Yeah. Just if you look at job opportunities, oftentimes people say, go ahead, get a 4-year degree. That's going to give you more job opportunities. But for people who are completely broke, oftentimes 4-year degrees are just not opportunities that they have because they can't go into that financial deficit and they don't have the time to be able to get those degrees and things like that. I think there are a number of things that. And I didn't come here prepared today to
that's
them
okay.
off. So I think it'll be helpful as we talk, so I can kind of.
And you would say that would apply to someone who's poor, who's white, just as much as someone who's poor is black. Like the trailer park kid from Arkansas, is it just as much of a disadvantage as the poor black child from South?
Well, I
South
think
Dallas?
that the poor trailer park trash people in Arkansas.
I didn't say trash.
I did.
I'm
I'm not mincy about words.
That's fine.
I'm concerned about the meaning behind it. I don't get triggered by the misuse of pronouns and shit.
Let me ask you this. I don't want to get off track. I want to go back to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Do you think most black people think the way you do?
No, absolutely not.
You think they are offended by words?
I think most people in general are offended by words.
Okay, because generally
I think
speaking,
I'm a rare
the
exception.
people that I've met most average Black Americans, not those in the media, don't tend to be nearly as sensitive as privileged white people about words.
I've seen it.
Okay, the discussion on words, I mean, I kind of agree with him. Like, I think what matters way more is the intent behind the thing. Now, you can still be ignorant and racist, unfortunately, because that's just what the view is. But, I mean, like, yeah, if somebody says, like, something, like, if somebody says, I don't know, like, if Dave Chappelle makes a joke about black people, like, I don't really care, you know? Now, if somebody makes a joke, consistently makes jokes about black people, and they're also promulgating racist things like racist policies and things that can hurt minority groups, then I am vehemently opposed to that person, because I think their actions, including their verbiage, are highly indicative of their subconscious feeling towards those minority groups. So, and yeah, it's racism is biological. If someone was like most of the time white people are racist is because they grow up in environments in which it's normalized. And those tend to be typically uneducated environments, which is an environmental factor. Like, yeah, people are racist because of their environment. And your biology reacts to the environment is the thing. So that's the game. But anyway.
Both ways.
Okay.
I don't think there's a way you can generalize it.
Okay.
I think it's a
So you're just an anomaly. Yeah.
basis. Yeah, I think we all are.
Okay.
We're all special little snowflakes.
Okay, so
Can I
trailer
drink
trash,
this?
I would rather you not, just
Yeah.
because what happens is, let's say, you know, someone at Shake Shack poisoned it, then
I like Shake
I'm on the
Shack.
hook.
You know, I work at In-N-Out, and I'll still go to
Do you
Shake
work at
Shack.
In-N-Out?
Yeah, I do.
Well, then I have a beef with you, because I think you're
So we have
overrated,
the beef.
overhyped, over everything. So the trailer trash
Not
white kid
overpriced,
from...
though.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'll
So
give
not
you that.
everything.
That is true. I think people just like to feel like they're a part of a secret menu. So you said the white trailer trash from Arkansas. So going back to classism, do
Yeah.
you believe that it would be the same disadvantage for someone who is poor in a lower class trailer trash white person from Arkansas as, let's say, a kid from inner city South Dallas, or, you know, they don't...
No, not quite, because of the stereotypes and the presumptions that people carry. You know, I think that when a white person walks into the public, people oftentimes go in with a more neutral idea of what they could be. They have less assumptions and whatnot. Just like, okay, look in this room right now. I'm the only black person right
Well,
now.
you weren't.
know?
There were other black guys. They're all... I'm
Maybe
seeing
30
browns and
minutes
Asians.
ago. Okay, I'm very outnumbered. I'm out-ratioed right now, right?
Well, can I say something right there?
Yeah.
Because I will tell you this. There have been some people who've come up who've been unsavory characters,
Yeah.
and you would not be Now, I will acknowledge this. Sometimes you make assumptions when you see somebody. For example, if I see a guy with a Hell's Angels jacket, I go, ooh, let me be careful. Or if he's, you know, got a teardrop tattoo. You would be someone here I would think, oh, that's someone who's dressed well, is articulate, has himself together.
I'm
I think
not
everyone-
dressed well right now. I'm
Well, you're
sorry
not.
about
You're
everyone to
dressed
be me,
cleanly.
but-
You got shoes going on. You're out
I do.
here.
Barely
Not
the
every-
Ritz.
which is more than I can say for everyone here. Some of these people look like they should. You know, they're the hobos. So I don't necessarily think that, at least in my experience, and with everyone I know who works in my crew, and we do have black people, and we do have Latinos.
Diversity
that is
quotas.
Yeah, it is. I don't think that people would necessarily look. I think some would. I don't think that's necessarily true.
I think it's a lot more common than you might think right off.
Could be.
Yeah, I think it's the unfortunate truth of the world that we live in, and it's derivative of the world that we came from.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that I would agree with that for a few reasons. Like we kind of mentioned, for example, let's use the education example specifically,
Yeah.
because you said going into college. I think that actually a young black man from South Dallas has a great advantage over a young white trailer trash user from Arkansas. Eminem, Salem's Lot, we'll go that. That way it's specific and we're not generalizing anybody. It's
Sure.
a very specific person.
Hey, I'm also from Detroit.
Because, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, where are you from in Detroit?
Michigan, Detroit.
Come on. Are you actually
I
from
don't know-
Detroit?
I don't know the
People say
hospital,
Detroit, they
yeah.
mean Mount Pleasant or something.
Detroit area. I don't remember. I moved here when I was like 4, and I
Okay.
don't really.
You're from
care.
Birmingham.
No, not Birmingham.
Um,
I'll remember when I hear of it. You know.
there are far more scholarships available
Yeah.
to black Americans, and black Americans are accepted into universities with significantly...
Okay, there are far more scholarships to black Americans, and I'm not familiar with the statistic at all, which I guess there probably are, but far more scholarships for Americans. And then I guess white is probably what he... because like scholarships are nice, but the idea is to inform an outcome. So if you present more opportunity of outcome, then that will happen. Which is why I think we should make education free in the fucking first place. But I mean, whatever. That's a separate topic. Since whites are more likely than blacks to receive merit-based scholarships, the shift in financial aid toward grants is based on merit rather than need. Yeah. I don't know where he's getting this is the thing. Maybe Bing knows? Okay. This was 2007. I don't know when he is referencing it. So 30% of all white students receive. Yeah, and I'm not gonna look super into this, but like I just don't know where that comes from. But like let's say that I'm correct and my research is perfect in every aspect, and I'm definitely not missing anything, which I might be. But you think it would pop right up when they say it. But yeah, that just doesn't seem true, really. So I don't know. If someone has a statistic for that, that's fine. You can link it or whatever. But yeah, like that would be a claim that's used to justify an opinion, which is not true. And it's within the realm of reason. Like there's things like we don't understand. Like we can't reconcile gravity with quantum mechanics. But you know, within like the realm of knowledge that's general and is totally accessible to the public. I think like this is I think for someone in his position with this large audience that should be a little bit ashamed of. Like he should have a much better take on that. So but
lower test scores than white Americans or Asian Americans. So
okay, so the Asian thing, I'm pretty sure Asians and I wanted somebody to bring this up in the comments because they just don't. But I'm pretty sure with Asians I experienced like a ton of violence. What racism do Asian Americans? Like I think like 30% of Asians have to be or like afraid, have to worry about like or experience violence or threats of violence. Although I can't quite remember what source that was. So I would argue that at a subconscious level, perhaps we tend to be more varied in our acceptance or the validity of racialized experiences of our Asian and Asian American neighbors. We tend to dismiss the impact of racism directed at Asians and Asian Americans, or when we learn from it. Okay. I think something we could do just with like this isn't super helpful. Another important element of the stereotype is the idea that Asians and Asian Americans do not experience racial discrimination, or at least not at the frequency and intensity of their non-Asian counterparts. Both dimensions are important. These two related generalizations make it difficult for clear and positive conversations about Twitter. Okay. Yeah, Donald Trump's a fucking idiot, but whatever, I won't generalize him with all Republicans, even though it's amazing how many of them actually hold on to him, but whatever. Yeah, the China virus is kind of fucked. And what's funny is people actually defend like that as like a good thing to call it. It's so fucking stupid, but anyway, move on. A typical response is one of indifference, dismissal, or minimalization. Hey, it's not that big of a deal. After all, I mean, that's fine, but this isn't really telling us like what outcomes are kind of. I believe we can counter these trends through a hard but necessarily work of effective allyship on behalf of Asian American community. Okay. Here's another good question though. Like, why are Asians more successful at school than whites? Oop. Let's see here. Why do Asian students do so well in school? Black teen, Latino teen, white teen. Okay. All this sounds like a racist question. Statistically proven factual answer according to greatschools.org. Although Asian American students make up only 4% of student body, however, the Asian student presence is considerably larger at the country's top universities. 24% at Stanford, 18% at Harvard, 25% at Columbia and Cornell. Upon graduation, they also pull down salaries that are about $10,000 heftier than their non-Asian counterparts. So why does this disparity exist? It isn't that Asian students are smarter than those ethnic minority and racial groups, but they are raised differently. 4 factors exist in the typical Asian American home to assist children in becoming high achievers. Parents manage their children's time outside of school. Parents assume the role of educator after hours. Oh, damn, okay. Parents teach their children that being a student is both fun and rewarding. Both parents and children have a genuine respect for educators. Now, there's a lot of Asians, but I do know in Japan they have, like, I think it was the number 2 education system at one point. I can't quite remember what the year was. I looked at it a while ago. But I do know, like, Japan is up there in terms of its education system. That's not that I would advocate it or want it or anything, but I do know they have a very good one. So basically, it seems like the parents tend to take a more engaged... They engage more in their children's education, it would seem like. And the children seem to also respect them more. That's interesting. I didn't know that. I would like to see some stats for it. I mean, I trust this, but I mean, yeah. I think there was also something about, like, violence. I just can't. Excuse me. Oh boy, Washington Post. Those who doubt that racial resentment fingers in this nation, Asian Americans are a favorite talking point. The argument goes something like this: if white privilege is so oppressive, if the United States is so hostile towards its minorities, why do census figures show that Asian Americans out-earn everyone? %20 higher than white. Yeah, okay, yeah. The problem, like, nobody wants to do kind of what I'm doing here. I mean, it's not fun. Oh, fuck you, bro. Come on. Use old. Okay. By the 70s, interesting. Society became less racist towards Asian. I mean, I'd say that's probably true, especially than, like, black people as well. I'd be interested in this. I mean, this is the Washington Post, but who are you? Brown University. Cool. What are you? What's your focus, buddy? Yeah. Okay. No, this is the MBR. Okay. I mean, yeah, I can see that too. I would like to see maybe some papers on that before I just jump full head hard in, but I think that's fine. I guess I don't really know of, like, a scholarly majority that's, like, vehemently anti it, but yeah. Anyway, I guess we can go back to Steven Crowder. Yeah, I think we get the point. I mean, if you want me to watch the whole thing, leave a comment. We will, but I'm not gonna, like, spend the whole video on it. Yeah, we'll watch a little bit more.
There are far more scholarships available
Yeah.
to Black Americans, and
But
Black
see-
Americans are accepted into universities with significantly lower test scores than white Americans or Asian.
Okay. First off, let's assume all this is true. This doesn't tell us the big picture. I mean, you're trying to talk about education. There's still, like, works, for example, and to say that those two things just prove that it's all their fault. Like, that would be true if those were the only two statistics we have, but it's not. You have to take into account things like background, socioeconomic group, location, financial bracket, the kinds of teachers they're getting, the level of racism incorporated. I mean, like, there's all these kinds of things you have to look for. So.
Asian Americans. So I do think that there have been some attempts to right wrongs of the past, which actually haven't yielded good results. They've yielded worse results in applications and enrollments and graduations. And what's interesting is when you look at the classism, first off, we have more class mobility here in the United States than anywhere else. Certainly than
Can you
Canada.
define class mobility for me?
Meaning there are more people in the United States
Who
who
can,
end
like,
up in the
shift
top
class
30% of
status.
income than anywhere else in the world. At some point in their life, we're in the top 10%, including people go from the top 10, from the bottom 10 or the bottom 30 to the top 30. The top. There's more class mobility here in the United States, more ability to rise out of poverty into upper middle class than anywhere else in the world. It's not even close.
Right. Just curious. I'm going to look it up afterwards. Where do you get those numbers
Absolutely. I can show them to you here
Yeah,
if you would like to.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to glance.
And it's even interesting where you take people where they might have a higher overall quality of living, like Sweden or Denmark, and you take Swedes or Danes and you bring them to the United States, and they have a higher class mobility and higher quality of living here in the United States. Because I think we acknowledge that different countries have different cultures, and sometimes they're more studious, sometimes there are cultures that are more industrious. But when you transplant any culture to the United States, I shouldn't say any, but all the stats that we have available to us, the best parts of their cultures that they bring actually are accentuated, and we see more of that.
Yeah,
So
I
I-
also think it's kind of interesting. Well, when you say transplant in the United States, can you be more specific on the areas? I think,
Well, I just use like Sweden and Denmark as an example.
but
because those
where
are
in the
people-
United States when they've been transplanted to? Because
Anywhere.
anywhere in the United States,
I doubt many of them are going, to the middle of Mississippi.
right, but I
don't
think
know.
that's part of the issue. When you look at rural areas, when you look at ghettos, where a lot of these lower income people are, where a lot of black people are, oftentimes
And
we
white
get
people.
more so black people oftentimes statistically when you look at
Because
but
those
where
are
in the
people-
United States when they've been transplanted to? Because
Anywhere.
anywhere in the United States,
I doubt many of them are going, to the middle of Mississippi.
right, but I
don't
think
know.
that's part of the issue. When you look at rural areas, when you look at ghettos, where a lot of these lower income people are, where a lot of black people are, oftentimes
And
we
white
get
people.
more so
But
black people.
it's unfucking-sputable that white people aren't in these situations nearly as much as black people, dude. Like, you got to look at that shit. You can't just say "and white people" and just call it a day. I mean, like, so that, I don't know. That's why I get like irritated at all of that so much. But it's kind of just disappointing how lazy that is. Like, you should not be that lazy as a propagandist or whatever the hell you want to call that position, an influencer or whatever.
Well, oftentimes, statistically, when you look at their our proportion of this society, I
No,
think
there are more white people on welfare than black people.
there are more white people in the United States.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying
But
as
when you
far as
look
the
at the
total
ratio-
number, yeah, I understand when you look
I'm
at the
talking
ratio.
about population ratio
Yes.
per capita wise.
You do have more black people who are poor than white
Yeah,
people.
and I
as a percentage.
oftentimes I
And why do you
think-
think that is?
Mainly because of the history of the United States, the discrimination that has happened in the past, the disadvantage that we were in the past. We started so far behind in this race, so like there's only so far that as a collective we're going to be now.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 19.
19.
19 and a half.
So
Shrunk
you
kid.
believe that, let's say, a 19-year-old yourself.
Yeah.
You seem like a pretty articulate guy. You going to school? Or
not
you're
right now.
working in and out? I think you'll probably do okay. You seem like a pretty sharp guy.
Yeah.
You believe that at this point you are feeling the ripple effects from slavery in the history of the United States and that you face systemic discrimination?
I think there have definitely been times in my life and places that I've been where I have felt the effects. I think overall, I grew up in a very privileged family. My parents, they make good money.
Do you have
So-
both parents?
Yeah, and that's the
a
other
huge,
thing. That's also a
far
huge
bigger than
thing.
any
Yeah.
other statistic.
Yeah.
Because when you take, that's something that I think is important, and maybe we could find common ground. When you take upper middle class white kids or black kids, they perform typically the same. When you take lower class white kids or black kids, they often perform the same. When you take any class of kids without a dad, they perform very poorly by all metrics available. As a matter of fact, if you want to avoid being in poverty, there are 3 things that you can do. It's very simple. Go to school, don't commit a crime, wait till you're married to have kids.
Right, so I want to hear your opinion on this. Why do you think that oftentimes more black children have to grow up in one household families? I want to hear.
Can I speak freely without being accused of racism?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it goes back to the welfare reform, and it goes back to the model cities program. It goes back to a welfare state created that disincentivizes people from staying married. There's a financial incentive right now to not be married.
So
All right. I mean, that's a complicated thing. Maybe I'll let him finish.
incentive is there. Why is it only happening to black families?
Because there's a higher percentage of black families who use welfare than white families.
And why is that? Because
Well, at a certain point, though, you do have to end that cycle. There is a responsibility. Your parents chose to stay together, right?
Sure.
That cycle can.
So this is the breaking point, and I'm glad I kind of waited for that. So his solution was, or what a lot of Christians do is a lot of them believe in free will, and it kind of goes. A big thing is this notion of whether or not you choose God. There's a lot of Christians who. There's a very small group called Calvinists who don't believe in that, but there's also a very big group of people who reject that. And this is all very general, but for all intents and purposes, the Christians believe that that you have to choose to be saved, to choose to go to heaven, and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, that's kind of where that thought process comes from, but it comes from nothing like academic, if that makes sense. So it's just kind of an intuition they have, but. Yeah, our bodies react to external stimuli. They have to. That's how we live.
Can only be broken through personal responsibility.
Yeah, but before we stray too far away from that,
sure.
Why are more black families on welfare?
But why were more black families not getting divorced? Why do they have stronger family households before the modern welfare state? In other words, blacks had a lower divorce rate. They had a lower fatherless household rate before the modern. We get it. Careful, there's a lot of connotations there.
Sure.
They had stronger family units before the modern welfare state.
Okay, this is interesting. Did blacks have a stronger family unit before the welfare state? Well, I'm sure it was stronger the first 100 years after slavery than during what will be the second 100 years. At one time, almost all black families were poor, regardless of whether one or both families were present. That's true as well. See, this doesn't really tell me anything either, though. I mean, not this, but like the Crowder, I guess, assertion. There is evidence that suggests that the welfare state had a negative impact on the black family unit. Oh, there is. Interesting. According to a source, welfare state has systemically preyed upon the family unit of black Americans since its inception. Interesting. I don't know much about the welfare state. I mean, I know like the typical Republican arguments, but I haven't like looked into it much. The way the system is structured financially incentivizes single-parent households. Have also done their part to rip apart the fire of the family as well. Oh wait, what? What is this? This sounds very. What is this source? Oh geez, the Libertarian Institute. Okay, nah, fuck that, buddy. How about this one? This one looks better. No, that was a terrible source. I hate libertarians. Okay. Where you go? Way the welfare state has. Who are you? He's an economist. Shit. So I mean, I think you could even say like, oh well, why is the welfare state bad? Maybe it might be, interesting. He's actually educated. Let's see. One time I was like was poor. I find the way welfare state has. It's not the only retrogression suffered by blacks in the age of racial enlightenment. In every census from 1980 to 1954, blacks were either just as active as or more as whites in the labor market. Interesting. I wonder if this guy like represents everything. Hey, Walter E. I wanna look into this guy more. I guess it's just, I'm a little concerned whether hopefully there's like a peer reviewed maybe the welfare state is just objectively bad too. I mean, I could be wrong on that as well. But he's educated, that's for sure. While Sturgeon Sutherland waged a one-man battle against Jim Crow from inside the army, he challenged the racial order, progress statements. Interesting. So he was more of a Malcolm X than a Martin Luther King. Interesting. I am curious, what are people saying on the welfare state? Just, I mean, I get like people don't like throwing money at people, which I guess makes sense, but I prefer like programs, honestly. Yeah, so they're just saying it's racist. There you go, Michigan. Oh, Jesus. In a racist society, it is inevitable that policies to assist the poor will be designed to shore up racial hierarchy. That's why the labor system is organized around racial distinctions. So, well, yeah, okay. So yeah, I can say that as well. But like, anyway, like the point I was trying to make. Holy shit! I got so much fucking crap open here. Yeah, like there's nothing wrong with just like, you know, looking a little bit into some things just to get a better idea. Come on. Here we go.
Now that was also sold to them from the Democratic Party. It was sold to them as something that was owed to them through reparations, right? This was a big part of the targeted black areas and encouraged them to get on welfare. And then through that point, continuing through that end, they then created financial incentives to not be married. And at a certain point, I do believe when all rights are equal, since the 1960s, as far as the right to vote, the right to, when we're talking about the right to own property, redlining has been stopped, and there are systemic advantages afforded to minorities, not afforded to white people. There does have to be, considering that we know how beneficial and how much of a privilege, there's no greater privilege than being raised in a household with a mother and father, that some personal responsibility does need to come into account. And that someone today who chooses to walk out on their wife has nothing to do with the Emancipation Proclamation.
What do you think the solution is? What do you think the end game is?
It's very tough to propose a solution because the solution can only come from the ground up through family units, through strong family units, and through moral character and teaching people to stay with their kids. Because like I said, I think if we educate young people, white and black, listen, be responsible, don't commit crimes, graduate school, wait till you're married to have kids.
Yeah.
And that will change, that will generationally change. In other words, statistically, I think it's a 97% chance.
Pretty sure like educated people get married more, don't they? I think that's actually less. God damn it. To get married. College are more likely to be married than less educated adults, yeah. It's Pew Research. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Like, and I'm trying to use Google and not go into these, like, kind of more academic articles just because I want, like, people who are a little bit intimidated by them and who, like, realistically, nobody's going to fucking look into academic articles, but I care, so I'm going to look. 8% of college, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could say, like, the welfare state is breaking it down, but I mean, like, I guess I just think that would be one contributing factor as opposed to, like, a conglomerate. And I think, like, enforcing the family unit would be improving things like education. I honestly think, like, education's, like, the biggest fucking social factor. I mean, richer countries are more educated. Yeah. Anyway, let's finish this up.
That you are above, at least middle class, if you do those things. It's not really rocket science. And by the way, that doesn't even necessarily mean that you need a higher education degree.
Yeah.
And no one talks about it.
Right.
And unfortunately, unlike our conversation here, which I think has been pretty fruitful, you know, often if white people say that, they're accused of being a racist.
Yeah, but before we stray too far away from that,
But will we agree on that, that's something that's been sort of tossed by the wayside, not been given the importance that it needs for all families, staying together and raising someone in a nuclear family?
yeah, overall, yeah.
And that sports cars mean small penises.
Yeah.
If you drive them like that.
It's okay, we don't judge.
Yeah,
we don't judge.
Small
it's,
penises.
It's what?
It's okay.
It's not the size of the boat, motion of the ocean shit.
That's
right?
not true at all.
Going back to education, I think primary and secondary education is also a very big issue. People who grow up in
Yeah, I like this kid.
less
man.
fortunate areas, people who grow up in ghettos, oftentimes they don't get the best primary education. And you're saying that the way to fix the nuclear family is to further educate these people, right?
Well, no.
No?
No, I didn't say that. I said we need to have a nuclear family, not to fix. There is no nuclear family.
Yeah, but
in
how
the
do you
community a lot
get
of
the
time.
nuclear family to enact itself?
Or maybe I misheard you, but a few moments ago,
I said
what
to
I took away
encourage a
from
nuclear family. That means a mother, father, and children. In other words,
I'm pretty. You used the word education earlier, so that's.
we need to
kinda what
educate young people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't necessarily mean that comes through school.
So where
I
do you
mean that
think
we
it
need
should
to
come from?
inform people. Yeah, I need
If it's not coming from school,
Well, I think
where
it
do
needs
you
to
want
come from leaders from both communities. I mean, let me ask you this. How much have you learned in school versus how much have you learned from people you respect or books that you read on your own or authoritative figures?
Far more from the latter.
Me too.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a responsibility for people to step up in positions of power, authority, who can inform. That's what I'm doing.
But I also think that's a learned skill. I think we should teach people how
That's a
to
good
learn
point.
for themselves.
Okay.
And I
So-
think that we can teach that in our school systems.
Primary schools.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, and I agree. I think that schooling is important. I come from a place like I was raised in Canada.
Yeah.
Born in Detroit, raised in Canada, and they do have a much better public education system. Because you can go to pretty much any school you want as long as you're willing to drive or take a bus. It's what
Yeah.
we call school choice here, and a lot of people say it's racist. In Canada, it's just, yeah, if you take a bus, it's fine. So what do you believe the problem is in primary education? Or because I definitely believe that our public education system, I think we're referring to public education,
Yeah.
right, is broken and needs improvement. And you think that's a big piece of the puzzle.
Definitely.
What do you believe is broken there, and how do you think we can maybe fix it?
Hard to say as someone who's not an educator, but I think that generally schools that have better funding and then have a staff that knows how to use that funding are going to be better off in the end. So we need to have better training for the faculty of the schools so that they can know how to allocate these funds properly
How do you get better training?
by creating better programs.
And that requires money.
Yeah.
Well, I would agree with you in the sense that obviously people, if you have to go to public schools, I think homeschooling is a big option now. We've seen with COVID-19 that people can do it.
I think
They don't
homeschool is a very 50-50 with the results.
wanna-
here,
James,
so-
we have quite a few homeschool people on the staff. And
I'm a
they're
homeschool
very-
kid
Oh,
myself,
really?
yeah.
Oh, no, your mom must have been terrible.
Not always. I love
no.
you, Mom. I love you, Mom. I'm just going to leave it at that.
No, he doesn't. He said that you place him in a
I
burlap
love
bag
you,
and beat him
Mom.
with reeds.
I didn't say that.
But the thing is, a lot of the most most funded school districts in the country are underprivileged areas. So, for example, you have like Washington, D.C., you have Detroit. These are areas specifically where you're talking about, and they have higher per pupil spending than most schools on average, certainly more than many.
That's why earlier I said I think we need to better allocate our funds. Just more money isn't always the answer.
Right.
We need to know how to spend the money.
I agree. And that's something that, so it sounds like you'd be advocating for something like school choice. Sounds like you'd be advocating for incentives for better teachers, more punishments for teachers who are bad, whose students don't
Definitely.
do
All things I also agree would probably work in the police force.
I agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
100%.
That's the thing for me. I've been saying for a long time, we need to reduce the power of teachers' unions who protect bad teachers, to encourage good teachers, and the same exact thing with the cops. Do we agree on that?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Hey, look
Absolutely.
at that.
Watch Louder with Crowder.
So, now here's the thing. This was a good conversation, in the sense that both people were charismatic and they were both addressing what was being said, and they weren't just like resorting to stupid insults and that kind of shit. Now I think to go back to the point of this whole stream is Steven Crowder racist for a bunch of that? I would say maybe if that was like the only things that he talked about, I would say probably not. Now, with regard to that, you could argue like, hey, it's still technically a prejudice, because it's not based on actual reason, although it might be on experience. It's when we say reason, we mean good reason. We don't mean like faulty reason or fallacious reasoning. Because otherwise, then nothing would be racist. So, yeah, I mean, I think when you look at kind of his overall perspective on things and you summarize it all together, he typically takes that right-wing stance. And like, if you look at virtually every field, industry, etc., he tends to have opinions like that, in which you justify something like you try to use welfare to justify that racism didn't exist at best case prima facie in the U.S. And yeah, I would still say that doesn't technically follow. I'd say he's definitely more informed than the average person. But yeah, he's not like that. Now his the stuff with his wife maybe, but that clip alone is not a it's not. It doesn't mean that he's like this horrible KKK person out to like destroy black people or anything like that. So, do I still think technically that makes him a little bit prejudiced? Sure, because of just kind of like how some of that was provided. But I mean, it's a game, so. Anyway, I think this was a good place to talk. I kind of wanted to dig into this article here. Yeah. So let's look into this. We'll read it quickly. Driven by a high-profile lethal force, is there evidence of systemic racism in the U.S.? Part 1, fatal police encounters. So this is a totally different topic. The other one was education. This one is police force. So driven by high-level lethal force, use of force cases in the U.S., race relations have become a major topic of conversation in 2020. Racism is a topic that divides our nations, our families, and our relationships. It's an emotionally charged, and should have used "and" there instead of "a." It's fucking pissing me off already. It's a emotionally charged and often leads. It's a emotionally charged and often leads to violence, protests, and hate crimes. I'm already pissed off about this spelling. There's ever a topic that needs to be clear thinking, objective analysis. It's racism. A significant portion of the discussion focuses on systemic racism. Systemic racism refers to the structure, organization, and rules of society. It indicates that society favors or gives advantage to one race over another. Systemic racism manifests itself in justice, employment, wealth, housing, healthcare, and education. To investigate the existence of systemic racism, we'll look at a variety of indicators within these areas, make determinations as to their statistical relevance, and decide if the evidence of systemic racism on a national level. So that's the thing. I don't think he focused enough on statistical relevance. He simply cited a potential cause as fucking up the marriage system, which fucks up everything else. But I think all you could say best with the welfare thing was okay, well, welfare, what does it do? You're giving money to people in poverty-stricken areas. I mean, there's a plethora of reasons. Like, just giving them money is not going to, necessarily help, which I think you would probably agree with. But that doesn't mean that that's destroying the family. I think that if you took away that money, like, that probably wouldn't fix their situation either. There's very much likely other reasons other than just money that are not letting people stick together. Because honestly, that would kind of help. I mean, you have two people to support each other, kind of work with each other, try to find solutions and everything. I mean, it would generally be better. But anyway, to investigate the existence of systemic racism, we'll look at a variety of indicators within these areas and make determinations as to their statistical relevance, decide if the evidence of systemic racism exists on a national level. But before we get started, let's cover some issues. In the event that we discover evidence of systemic racism, it does not mean that you are racist. I kind of disagree with that, but that's fine. I appreciate that because he's trying to get people to actually listen to him. So yeah, your neighbor / police officer / banker etc. is racist. Yeah, it doesn't mean all those people are racist. Sure thing. Okay. Systemic racism means that the system favors one group over another, which it's good that he specifies that because he is talking about the systemic part of it. Also, we are looking at data from a national level, so we are determining if the nation as a whole favors one group or another. You may have an entirely different experience at a local level. Likewise, in the event that we discover that there is no evidence of systemic racism, that doesn't mean your personal experience with racism is invalid. You don't have systemic racism at a local level. We are making broad determinations to inform discussions at a national level so that there can be a constructive conversation about what needs to be done. For example, the Justice Department determined that there was systemic racism in Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. That doesn't mean the entire state of Arizona or the United States have systemic racism. This is very true. Findings only apply to that office. In the interest of fairness and clear thinking, we need to be clear about what we discover and do our best to eliminate bias from the findings. And then we can have an honest discussion that minimizes the emotional fireworks that occur when we discuss race relations. Holy shit, right? To identify evidence of systemic racism, we'll focus on 5 broad categories: wealth, employment, education, housing, and justice. We'll do a series of articles that analyze publicly available data and determine if the data provides statistically significant evidence of systemic racism. Throughout the analysis, we'll apply the scientific method. This means that we'll identify the null hypothesis, that there is not evidence of statistic racism, and attempt to prove the null hypothesis. So that's good epistemology right there. If we succeed in proving the null hypothesis, we have to accept that there is not evidence of systemic racism for that category. And this is an important distinction because you don't want to say that you don't want to say that there isn't or there is. You want to start with a neutral stance that there is not evidence for. If we fail to prove that, we must accept there's. If we fail to prove the null hypothesis, we must accept that there is evidence of systemic racism for that category. Yes, so this is also important right here. Basically, sorry, my brain. If the goal initially is to prove the null hypothesis. That's to prove that there's not evidence for systemic racism. An attempt. Oh no, wait. I'm misreading this, and I'm misspeaking. This means that we will identify the null hypothesis, that there's not evidence for systemic racism, and attempt to prove the null hypothesis. If we succeed in proving the null hypothesis, we have to accept there is not evidence of systemic racism. Okay, if we succeed in proving the null hypothesis, we have to accept that there is not evidence of systemic racism for that category. So you want to prove the null hypothesis, yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah. I don't know why I got that confused. If we fail to prove the null hypothesis, we must accept that there is evidence of systemic racism for that category. When we're finished, we'll look at the data together and make a determination based on the complete picture. There we go, okay. Yeah, basically the null hypothesis is the neutral one, which is that there is not evidence of systemic racism for that category. Yeah, and this kind of makes more sense to me in terms of religion because you always start with a null hypothesis and then you work towards other conclusions. So fatal police encounters and systemic racism. Protests and violence over fatal police encounters have risen to historic levels. We'll examine for systemic racism and fatal police encounters by looking at a variety of indicators. For the study, we'll focus on blacks. Are fatal police encounters for blacks in proportion to the population? What other criteria can we examine to understand the relationship? For each of these indicators, we'll focus on proving the null hypothesis. There is no difference in how the system treats blacks and whites. If we succeed, we accept there is no difference between how blacks and whites are treated, and there is no evidence of systemic racism. Just want to make sure. Damn it. Just want to make sure that's still working semi-okay. And it is. Okay. Sure thing. I think we're good. Alright. Where were we? Focus on blacks. Yep. For each of these indicators, we'll focus on proving the null hypothesis. There is no difference in how the system treats the blacks and whites. If we succeed, we accept that there is no difference between how blacks and whites are treated, and there is not evidence of systemic racism. If we fail to prove the null hypothesis, we accept that there is a difference between how blacks and whites are treated for these indicators, and that represents evidence of systemic racism. Now, this might seem like a logical jump to some of you. Like, if we fail to prove that there is no evidence, then there's a difference between how blacks and whites are treated. Yeah, you could say, like, oh, just because we failed to prove that there is a null hypothesis doesn't mean that we should accept that there are differences in how they're treated. But I think if... I mean, it's not hard to prove treatment. I mean, if you just see like the outcome, that's fine. But anyway, yeah, that's statistical epistemology. If you need more questions about that, that's fine. I mean, you can kind of confuse it by saying the no thing, but I mean, I'll delve into that if people have problems. When people think about looking at the data, a vision usually pops into their head of a huge database where everything is stored neatly for the taking. That database doesn't exist. You know what? This is bugging me. And I'm going to look into this right now just because I have time. So would it be true? Would it be true? Would the statement be true? Oop. Yeah, I was going to say, that didn't quite sound right. Okay, well that represents evidence. Okay, I see. So that's evidence. That's not proof. I see. I'm an idiot. Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, that's fine. We'll go back to this article. Yeah, basically, okay, sure. You just said evidence. I kind of jumped to conclusions a little bit there. Gathering data. When people think about looking at the data, a vision usually pops into their head, a huge database where everything is stored neatly for the taking. That database doesn't exist. The United States is a decentralized government. Consequently, data on crime is also decentralized. Every police department agency has their own standard for how they report data on arrests, incidents, and convictions. The FBI and the Bureau of Justice Statistics attempts to gather this data into a central location, but is spread out among hundreds of tables with hopeful meaningful names like 2018 Table 42A. Fortunately, the University of Michigan has aggregated much of the data. Nice. Some data simply isn't collected. There isn't a government database or table on fatal police encounters. We rely on organizations like Mapping Police Violence, Fatal Encounters, and the Washington Post to scour official records and media reports and gather information together. For the rest of us, before you start screaming about media bias, blah, 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 this isn't some book of numbers summed together. Every incident is documented with links and supporting evidence. The Bureau of Justice Statistics recognizes the Fatal Encounters data as sound source of evidence. We'll be using the mapping police violence and the fatal police encounter data for our analysis. We aren't paying attention to their findings. We're going to do our own work. We just need the data. As much as possible, we'll be viewing data at rates per million population. This allows us to compare findings proportionately. Fatal encounters by police department. The mapping police violence database provides a breakdown of fatal encounters by almost 100 major police departments around the country. The dataset currently covers 2013 through 2019 and includes the supplementary data about violent crime and murder rates. We can extract the data and average the fatal encounters by race for each police department. Keep in mind that we are looking at rates per million. Because of the way the ratios work, police departments with very low black populations will usually show unusually high rates. Departments like Anchorage, Reno, and Scottsdale will look particularly bad because they have such low black populations. So there's the black, there's the whites, there's the Hispanics, and that's the death per million. So blacks are quite a bit higher in all these different places per all these different departments. The graph shows a stark difference in the rates of blacks versus whites. We can test for statistical significance by creating 10,000 simulations and checking to see how often this distribution occurs. The value we receive is referred to as a p-value. A p-value of less than 5% is considered statistically significant. In this case, the p-value is 0. So we can test for statistical significance by creating 10,000 simulations and checking to see how often this distribution occurs. The value we receive is referred to as a p-value. I'm just going to Google this because it's been a hot minute. Testing in order to quantify the statistical significance. Okay. I'm curious how you determine. He might tell us, honestly. This is a weird thing. Is used in the context of a null hypothesis testing in order to quantify the statistical significance of a result being observed value of the chosen statistic. The problem with math is everything's so fucking vague because it has to be universally applicable. The lower the p-value is, the lower probability of getting that result in the null hypothesis. Oh, that's not fucking hard. Okay. Yeah, it's not too bad. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, where were you? So a p-value of less than 5% is considered statistically significant. In this case, the p-value is 0. This ratio of black deaths to white deaths never occurs in our sample. So we reject the null hypothesis that isn't a difference between black encounters and white encounters. And it never occurs in our sample, so we reject the null hypothesis that there isn't a difference between black encounters and white encounters, and accept the hypothesis that there is a difference for this dataset. Blacks are victims of fatal encounters at higher rates than whites. We use the fatal encounter database to compare outcomes going back to 2000, looking at the year by year. So we did it by death amounts. Excuse me, sorry. I guess now we're doing it by fatal encounters. That's fine. So we just okay, yeah, did that already. We can use the fatal encounters database to compare the outcomes going back to 2000, looking at the data by year. It takes out the skew from low populations in exchange for fewer samples. The annual data from the fatal encounters also provide a p-value of 0, so the differences are statistically significant. The average rate of incidence among blacks is 3.9 times higher than the average number of incidents among whites. In this case, we also need to accept that blacks are victims of fatal encounters are proportionally higher than whites. Alright, first instinct is to ask if blacks commit proportionally more crime than whites. However, this is not a valid comparison. We're testing for disparities in our police encounters, so we can't use police encounters as a testing criteria. It's circular logic, sure thing. If disparities exist, these disparities would distort the analysis We need to find neutral comparisons that remove police encounters from the testing criteria. As an example, let's look at marijuana usage vs. marijuana arrests. Marijuana usage is determined through surveys conducted by mental health organizations. Usage is not determined by police encounters, so it functions as a control in our experiment. The substance abuse and SAM ASA provides data on drug usage, and I found a set of summary data from InfoPlease. Since InfoPlease is not a research-level organization, I validated the results against a 2013 report from SAM HSA and a report from NCBI. The chart below displays marijuana usage by race, so blacks are typically more in terms of population, and that's by race. So even though like the whites are lower, the whites are higher. Interesting. For this data set, usage of marijuana among whites is statistically higher than among blacks and Hispanics. The SAM HSA report found no statistical significance in illicit drug use, all drugs, not just marijuana, and the NCBI report found higher use among whites than blacks. We can accept that the marijuana usage is the same or greater among whites than blacks. That's fine, yeah. We expect arrests to be proportionate to the usage. Data on the arrest for marijuana usage is provided by the University of Michigan aggregation of the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting Statistic. This chart below aggregates the arrests for marijuana possession by state from 2009 to 2016. No data is available for Florida. Okay. It's quite a bit higher. Rate per million. So it'd be like, 10,000 per million or whatever. But on average, arrests for marijuana possession of blacks is almost 4 times higher than arrests for whites. Even though the whites use marijuana at the same rate or higher than blacks, the arrest rate is not indicative of actual usage rate. This is why we can't use encounters as our criteria in our testing. The encounters can be distorted by the conditions that we're testing for. We need to look for a criteria that will neutralize the effect of police encounters on that outcome. That's the thing. You need a comprehensive look at everything. Disparity of marijuana arrests by race per million. Violent crime. What criteria can we use to examine the relationship between crime and fatal police encounters? One consideration is the rate of violent crime, which is conveniently available to us in the MPV database. The rationale is that high incidence of violent crime would predict an increase in fatal police encounters. We can take the rate of violent crime, which doesn't consider race or police encounters, and use it to predict fatal police encounters. Okay. A statistical model called linear regression analysis allows us to look at the relationship between violent crime and fatal police encounters. The model will tell us if the relationship is statistically significant and how much violent crime explains fatal police encounters. Clarify, we aren't saying the violent crime was or wasn't occurring during the incident. We're examining whether an overall environment of violent crimes results in more frequent fatal police encounters. This has nothing to do with the justification of the events themselves. In the chart below, relationships exist if the dots trend in the same direction as the line. The closer the dots are to the line, the better the relationship. In our example, there's a statistically significant relationship between violent crime and fatal encounters. But it is weak. The model provides a value that tells us what percentage of deaths are explained by the violent crime rate. In this case, the violent crime rate only explains 5% of the outcome. Nice. What if we looked at the relationship between the violent crime rate? I have to go soon, fuck. The violent crime rate and the fatal encounters among blacks are higher levels of violent crime related to more fatal encounters among police in the black population. Running the analysis and looking at the chart below shows no relationship between the level of violent crime and the number of deaths among blacks. The relationship is not statistically significant, so we can't say that higher levels of violent crime result in more deaths among blacks. Comparing the overall murder rate produces similar results. There's a weak 1% relationship between the murder rate and all fatal police encounters, but no relationship between the murder rate and the fatal police encounters among blacks. So for this data set, we have to accept a null hypothesis. There's no relationship between the blacks and police encounters and the overall murder rate for violent crime, or overall violent crime rate. What if the victim is armed? Should it matter if the victim is armed? Ideally, the threat to the police officer by an unarmed assailant is the same whether the assailant is black or white. We want to know if there's a difference in fatal encounters by race when the subject is unarmed. Again, using the scientific method, we have to test for no difference in fatal encounters by race when the subject is unarmed. The MPV database provides information on whether the subject is armed, or disarmed, or not having an actual weapon, such as a toy gun. Look at the outcomes by year. Blacks, whites. As the graph shows, unarmed blacks are proportionally more likely to be killed in the police encounter than their white counterparts. Testing shows that these differences are statistically significant, which reject the null hypothesis and suggest that there is a difference in outcomes for unarmed black encounters than for unarmed white encounters. Conclusion. Each of our tests, we determined that there is no difference in outcomes for blacks vs whites given these outcomes and data. We must note that there is evidence of systemic racism in regards to fatal police encounters among the black population. Let's review what that does and doesn't mean. It does not mean you're racist, people are racist, etc. The analysis shows us that there is evidence of a problem and that the problem should be investigated and addressed. It doesn't tell us the cause of the problem or the nature of any specific incident. It doesn't tell us anything about your community, how your community handles criticism. It does tell us the nation, that as a nation, this is a problem worthy of our attention and further study. Regardless of the cause, it's certainly something that we want to improve upon. To further understand that there is evidence of systemic racism within our criminal justice system, next article will dig into traffic stops. Does race play a role in incidents and outcomes of traffic stops? Let's find out. So this was just a good one for crime. I'll probably go over it again. I kind of have to go, but yeah, I think we'll... Is it respond? Yeah, no, I'll go more in detail on this. This is a pretty good article, though. So, anyway, I appreciate you watching. If you tuned in, I've been going for almost 2 hours, so, I mean, yeah, this should be fun.